What I'm about to share with you will challenge everything you believe about the safety of your own home. And by the end of this tale, you'll understand why some doors should never be opened and some voices should never be answered. I barely made it home in time, just 1 minute to spare. I was singing along to the radio, completely lost in the melody. Then suddenly I found myself staring slack-jawed at the most menacing storm clouds I had ever witnessed in my entire life. As someone born and raised in Vermont, I was no stranger to the harsh winter squalls. But there was something deeply foreboding about these dark clouds rolling in over the mountains. After reaching my house, I opened my car door and stepped out into the bitter cold evening. The wind lashed at my face and created a terrible howling sound in my ears. I raced up the steps and slipped through the front door of my house. Just in time, Luke said to me in greeting, his voice carrying a note of concern. My husband was standing in front of the living room window, surveying the mountains beyond our city. By the time I walked over to him, I could barely see 2 streets down. It seemed like we would be spending the entire evening inside. Came out of nowhere, I commented before I could even set my bag down. Suddenly, I heard the doggy door open with its familiar creaking sound. We didn't own any pets, but we often entertained visits from a neighborhood cat whom Luke had affectionately named Rigoton. Sure enough, an old orange cat soon appeared in our living room, leaving a trail of muddy paw prints as he trotted over to Luke. "Ah, the serial couch surfer returns," Luke chuckled warmly. "Too cold out there for you?" he asked the cat, who was currently rubbing his head against Luke's shin. The cat meowed loudly, as if in complete affirmation. Tony wasn't terribly fond of most people, but Luke had a special way with animals. He reached down to pet Tony, eliciting a melody of purrs from the contented feline. "Come on," he said, standing up with purpose. "I'll fix you some dinner." "Thanks. Thank God I'm starving," I replied gratefully. "I wasn't talking to you," Luke said with a warm laugh, walking toward the back of the house to fetch some cat food for Tony. Half an hour later, just as Luke and I had finally sat down to eat our dinner, we heard the doggy door open once again. I raised an eyebrow at my husband with curiosity. Tony was our only regular 4-legged visitor. I wondered who else could have let themselves inside our home. I didn't have to wonder for long. Seconds later, a border collie tore into the dining room, barking and whining with desperate urgency. Before I continue with this terrifying encounter, I need you to understand something crucial about sharing these stories with you. Every subscription, every notification bell you activate, gives me the strength to bring you more of these spine-chilling tales that will keep you awake at night. Subscribe now and hit that notification bell, because your support literally powers this channel's ability to uncover the most haunting stories from around the world. Don't forget to check the description below for our exclusive giveaway that could change your life forever. Now back to that fateful night when everything changed. Luke and I rose sharply from our seats at the table, watching the dog intently as it came to a complete stop in the corner of the room. I realized as the poor creature lowered its head and tucked its tail between its legs that I recognized this animal. "Hey, that's Mrs. Johnson's dog," I said, rounding the table to check if the dog was injured. "Tucker. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I see her walking him all the time," Luke confirmed. I crouched down next to Tucker and slowly reached out my arm toward him. To my complete surprise, the usually sweet-tempered border collie pulled its lips back in a menacing snarl. The dog lunged forward slightly and snapped his teeth aggressively. It was clearly a warning, not an attempt to hurt me, but I backed off immediately. Luke shot me a worried look. He's usually much more mild-mannered," he observed with concern. "I'll give her a call and let her know he's with us," Luke decided. Luke left the room to grab his phone while I studied Tucker from a safe distance, looking for any signs of injury. His frantic barks had been replaced by occasional mournful whines. He was no longer racing around frantically, seemingly content with his place in the corner, but his posture remained fearful and defensive. It was hard to tell with the way he was carrying himself, but I saw no visible wounds on his body. "Do you have signal?" Luke shouted from another room. I took my phone out of my pocket to check, and to my complete surprise, I didn't. We had generally reliable coverage in this area, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd lost cell service. I tried restarting my phone, walking around to different spots in the house, and turning airplane mode on and off. Nothing worked. Unfortunately, if it was affecting both of us, it was probably an issue with our service provider, meaning there was little we could do about it. I was about to ask if he still had Wi-Fi on his phone when a light but urgent tapping sound filled the room. I listened for a moment, trying to place the origin of this mysterious sound. Soon I traced it to the bathroom, or more specifically, the bathroom window. When I got there, I saw a small fuzzy animal standing on the windowsill and scratching fervently at the glass. "What in the world?" I whispered to myself. The little creature didn't seem to notice my presence at all. I took another step forward into the bathroom, and I realized as I approached that the animal had torn right through the window screen. "No cell service, no Wi-Fi, no nothing," Luke called out as he entered the room. "At least the lights are on," he added, looking over my shoulder at the frantic creature. "Is that a weasel?" I asked my resident animal lover. Luke shook his head with certainty. "Pretty sure that's a marten," he corrected me. "Neat." I was about to compliment his identification skills before I looked over and saw the expression in his eyes. "Don't ask me what I think you're about to ask me," I pleaded. "Please, they're endangered," he argued. "You know this isn't Noah's Ark, Luke," I protested firmly. "We can't shelter every animal in Vermont." I swear the rodent took a break from ripping through my window screen just to glare at me accusingly. I glared right back at the defiant creature. "Besides, this little thing here looks rabid," I added for good measure. Luke and I spent a couple of minutes arguing back and forth about what to do. I wasn't keen on taking in any more impromptu guests, but Luke was adamant about saving it from the storm. "There's something off about how desperately he's trying to get in," he insisted. "It might be on the verge of freezing to death or something worse." After a while, he convinced me to take pity on the marten. I had to admit, the way it was throwing itself against the glass was more than a little unsettling. Reluctantly, I opened the window and allowed it to squeeze through the hole in the screen. However, I didn't realize that the marten wasn't the only creature waiting to get inside our home. Before I could shut the window completely, a flurry of about 20 mice surged into the bathroom from outside. They must have been sitting on the sill as well, but I guess I had overlooked them, mistaking their fluffy white bodies for freshly fallen snow. I jumped backwards, swallowing a terrified shriek as one of them landed directly on my foot. Eventually, I managed to shut the window without stepping on any mice, but not before a red bird, a cardinal, I think, squeezed its way inside as well. Stunned by this bizarre invasion, I hurried after the animals as they made a beeline for the center of the house. When I entered the dining room, I saw not only Tucker and the animals who had just burst in through the bathroom, but also another cat and 2 dogs that I didn't recognize at all. Cursing under my breath, I realized that they must have entered through the doggy door. I yelled out to Luke to lock it immediately as I tried to make sense of the chaotic scene unfolding in front of me. The animals gave each other a wide berth. The cat didn't so much as look at the mice, nor did the dog seem at all interested in the cat. All of them were shivering and trembling as they pressed themselves into corners or squeezed into whatever hiding spot they could find. The dogs whined desperately, the mice squeaked in terror, and even the cardinal was making a strange, almost mournful chirping noise. The only one who was behaving normally was Rigaton, whom I had to shoo away from the terrified mice hiding under the china cabinet. "What the hell is going on?" Luke asked, his voice filled with confusion and growing fear. I had absolutely no explanation to offer him. We had weathered these storms before, but never had I seen one inspire such desperate panic in our local wildlife. After another failed attempt at coaxing Tucker out of his corner, I made my way to the living room and stared out the large window. A total whiteout stared back at me ominously. I could only see a few feet out in every direction before the world was completely swallowed up by darkness and snow. It was scary, but it was also beautiful in a strange, hypnotic way. It was easy to lose myself in thought as I watched the snow fall in thick, heavy flakes. What could have spooked the animals so much, I wondered to myself. Could it really be the cold alone? The weather hadn't seemed all that bad when I'd arrived home. Sure, it had been cold outside, but not blizzard cold. When I'd opened the bathroom window, I'd been distracted by the mice. But when I thought about it carefully, I didn't remember a freezing cold wind sweeping into the house alongside our uninvited animal guests. I raised my arm, pressing the back of my hand against the glass surface. Then I suddenly stilled, in complete shock. "Luke," I quietly called out, my voice barely above a whisper. He appeared around the corner seconds later, Tony cradled protectively in his arms. "Is it just me? Or is the glass warm?" I asked with growing unease. Luke stepped closer, shifting to hold the cat in one arm and placing his free hand against the window pane. He didn't respond immediately, but the way his mouth set into a thin line told me that he felt the exact same disturbing thing. "What does this mean?" I asked, though I feared the answer. "I don't know," he replied, his voice heavy with uncertainty and dread. We both stood in complete silence for what felt like an eternity. The wind howled fiercely outside, but I had the unsettling sense that if I opened a window and stuck my hand out, it wouldn't feel cold at all. I didn't want to find out, though. Opening any windows or doors at that point seemed like an incredibly bad idea. In fact, I was about to check that all entry points to our house were properly secured when Luke pointed at something moving outside. A large black mass ambled its way toward us through the swirling snow. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Its shape and gait were so strange that I thought I was witnessing a brand new animal, but once it stepped fully into the faint glow emanating from our porch light, I realized with horror that it was a black bear. Its lower jaw and one of its hind legs had been completely ripped off. From the trail of blood it had left in its wake, it was clear that these wounds were fresh and severe. The bear stumbled closer to our house, stopping only inches from the glass. With every weary step it took, I could make out another deep laceration on its massive body. I watched in absolute horror as this wounded creature stared directly at us with a look in its eyes that could only be described as desperately pleading. I held its gaze for a few agonizing seconds, and then the creature collapsed onto its side. A puddle of dark red blood pooled outward from its broken body. Soon, the strange expansions and contractions of its rib cage ceased entirely. Never once did it look away from us as it slowly bled out and died right there on our front lawn. There was a long, heavy silence before Luke and I dared to speak again. "You think?" Luke began hesitantly, his voice barely audible. "You think that's what the animals were afraid of?" he asked. I hoped so desperately, but something deep in my gut told me that it wasn't. After all, even if that massive bear was the creature they'd been running from, one question still remained unanswered. What could have inflicted that level of brutal trauma on a black bear of that enormous size? I think we should get away from the windows, I suggested urgently. As we made our way to the middle of the house, the lights flickered once, then twice, and then abruptly went out altogether. We were plunged suddenly into complete darkness. The sudden blackness seemed to put the animals even more on edge than they had been before. The squeaks and whines increased in volume dramatically as I fumbled around and procured 2 flashlights from our kitchen cabinet. I handed one to my husband, and then the 2 of us made our way to the dining room, sitting on the floor with our backs pressed against one of the walls. Luke was calm on the surface, but I could tell that the strangeness of this entire situation was causing him significant emotional distress. At least Tony's presence seemed to bring him some peace of mind. For some inexplicable reason, she was completely unaffected by whatever mysterious force was tormenting all the other animals. I studied her carefully as she relaxed comfortably in Luke's lap, her eyes closing peacefully as he absent-mindedly stroked her fur.
Why was it that she wasn't afraid like the rest of them? She had come to our house right before the blizzard set in, whereas the rest of the animals had likely been outside for much longer. Had they seen something out there in the storm? If they had, could it have been the same terrifying thing that killed the bear? Hey! Luke's shaky voice suddenly broke through my racing thoughts. Do you hear that? He whispered urgently. I didn't hear anything at first, and then I realized with growing alarm that I didn't hear anything at all. No wailing of the wind, no sounds from the frightened animals scattered throughout our house. Nothing. It was as if the whole world had suddenly gone completely quiet. I looked around the room frantically. All of the animals were so still, it was as if they were afraid to move even a single muscle. I clicked my flashlight off, wanting to attract as little attention as possible. Luke immediately followed suit. For a long, tense moment, we just sat there in the pitch-black darkness, listening intently to the unnatural silence. And then, cutting through the oppressive quiet, I heard a voice. Hello? Came the clear sound of a person calling to us from outside our house. Hello, anyone in there? It asked, its tone far too nonchalant for someone supposedly weathering the full brunt of a raging blizzard. I need some help out here, the voice continued with disturbing casualness. Next to me, Luke shifted as though he were about to stand up. I reached out desperately and grabbed hold of his arm, pulling him back down to the floor while clutching Tony protectively. There wasn't a chance in hell I was about to let him investigate that mysterious voice. It was so strangely quiet outside that I could hear the distinct crunching of footsteps in the snow as the person moved around our property. Please, the voice said, and it had gotten noticeably closer, like it was circling the house methodically. Please, I really need help. It continued with the same unsettling lack of emotion. Can I just come in for a minute? It's so cold out here. My grip tightened desperately on Luke's arm. The complete lack of genuine emotion in the voice's tone sent a bone-deep chill up my spine. He reached over, holding my hand tightly in his, as the source of the voice moved even closer to our dining room window. Come on now, don't you have room for one more? The voice asked, with terrifying persistence. It was now positioned right outside the dining room window, so close I could almost feel its presence through the glass. I closed my eyes like a complete coward, not wanting to see whatever horrifying thing was about to step into view. Next to me, there was a single sharp intake of breath from Luke. For what felt like an absolute eternity, neither of us moved so much as a single muscle. And then there was a light, chilling chuckle from outside the window. There were more footsteps, but this time they were moving away from us. They seemed to be taking the unnatural silence with them as they departed. The wind remembered itself, returning with a howling vengeance in the mysterious visitor's absence. Luke's hand had gone completely slack in mine, but I held onto it for a very long time, sitting there with my eyes shut tight in terror. It must have been a full hour before I finally dared to open my eyes and breathe normally again. Are you okay? I finally asked, turning toward my husband. No response. I tried asking again, a little louder this time, and still my husband didn't respond at all. "Luke?" I called out desperately. When I clicked on the flashlight, I saw Luke staring directly at the window, his face twisted into an expression of absolute horror I had never seen before in my entire life. His skin was deathly pale, and his body was rigid as a corpse. Try as I did, I couldn't get him to respond to me in any way whatsoever. His look of sheer terror never once changed, even as I carried him to the car and drove us as fast as I could to the nearest hospital. The doctor said it was a stroke. Of course, I was absolutely incredulous that such a thing could happen to my fit, non-smoking, 29-year-old husband. But no one could offer me a better medical explanation for his condition. For the next few days, I waited desperately for a recovery that never came. Then the days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and the months into long, painful years. While Luke regained some very minimal motor control, blinking occasionally and twitching his fingers slightly, it was clear that he would never be the same person again. I became his full-time caretaker, spending my days attending to all of his physical needs and my nights praying desperately that he would make a miraculous recovery. As of this evening, 5 years have passed since that terrifying storm changed our lives forever. Old Rigaton is still alive and kicking somehow, and her visits always seem to make Luke perk up just a little bit. She's sleeping peacefully on his chest as I record this story, taking care of him in her own special way. I'm grateful to have her around, but even though I try not to be superstitious, her presence always brings me back to that night of the blizzard. I think about Tucker, who ran away after the storm passed and was never seen again. I think about the marten and the mice and the bear, and the way all of them acted like they were fleeing from something terrible. I think about the look on Luke's face, and I can't help but wonder if they all saw the same horrifying thing. Maybe Luke saw something he wasn't meant to see, something so terrible that his brain destroyed itself, trying to comprehend its true nature. I look at my husband, the love of my life, and can't help but mourn what was taken from me that night. If I had opened my eyes, if I had been brave enough to look outside that window, would I have met the same fate as him? "What did you see?" I ask him, like I have asked 1,000 times before. I never get an answer.